Welcome into a Wednesday edition of the RotoWire Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Nick Whalen, Brandon Kravitz here with you, as we are every Wednesday morning at 10:30 a.m. Central Time. Brandon, huge slates coming at us in the NBA. They always do this around the holidays, right? Especially a holiday like Thanksgiving, where the league takes off. It's like, okay, it's nice to take a break, focus on college basketball, focus on the NFL tomorrow. But as NBA fans and as people who cover the league, we pay the price with these 14-game slates.
Yeah, the last couple of days have been madness. My hometown Orlando Magic team that I work alongside, 6-game homestand just started last night against the Toronto Raptors. If you're watching on the video, maybe you see some bags under the eyes. And it's only going to heat up from here. Got a big Thanksgiving spread tomorrow, and then back to the Amway Center after the Nuggets tonight. By the way, Celtics in town 2:30 on Black Friday. So I've got a busy schedule, and then just trying to keep up with everything else that's going on around the association. And now these in-season tournament days, like Tuesdays used to be a pretty chill day in the NBA. Not anymore. They're starting to load them up. So we've definitely got a lot of content to come through.
Yeah, man. I want to talk about the Magic in a moment. I will also be attending a game on Friday, not to work it like you will be, but I will be in attendance for the clash between the Milwaukee Bucks and the Washington Wizards at Fiserv Forum on Friday night. Yeah, hot ticket, especially on Black Friday. But heading out there with the boys, that'll be a lot of fun. Which it's going to be, it's no matter what, I'm always excited to go to an NBA game, especially, I don't go to a ton of Bucks games despite living like 10 minutes away from Fiserv. Prices have like quadrupled from the days of going to watch John Salmons at the Bradley Center like 10 years ago. But this entire game, I think, is going to be overshadowed by the game that we get tonight between the Bucks and the Celtics, which, obviously in the NBA, everybody plays everybody multiple times. It's not like you get these like game of the year in the regular season type of moments, but I think this is the most anticipated regular season game on the schedule, at least so far.
Yeah, I would agree. And my first inclination is that the Bucks get smacked tonight. This is a team that has played well as of late, but the Boston Celtics at home are a wagon. And they have, I did the math today in terms of the differential of their home court advantage. They're beating teams by an average of 23 points per game on their home floor to this point in the season. Seems like they're just gelling quicker with a couple of their new pieces, but it's mostly the same guys. The Milwaukee Bucks, they've got the star power. Giannis, Damian Lillard's put together a couple of 30-point outings, but defensively they haven't figured it out. Yeah, so I think that it is a really interesting matchup. See how it plays out. Got to roll the ball out on the floor, see what happens. But I think the Celtics are by far the better team right now.
Well, we did get some interesting injury news on that front about 10 minutes ago. Jason Tatum listed as questionable tonight due to an illness.
Forget everything I just said then.
Yeah, he, like both of us, is a little bit under the weather. We're going to be just pushing through today with all the audio and video stuff we got going. We babysat, my wife and I babysat our 2-year-old niece over the weekend, which was great. We love her. She's a lot of fun. She coughed and sneezed all over us like 100 times. And it's just, I hate being sick. Like I'm not a hypochondriac necessarily. I just hate it. I just get like upset when I'm sick. And I just knew, starting Sunday, I was like, oh boy, here we go. It's only a matter of time. And then of course, this morning I wake up and feel terrible. All right, let's
hanging
talk about
around snotty 2-year-olds is a really good way to get sick, by the way. I have a 4-year-old.
She's sick all the time.
That 2 to 4 range, they're bringing home stuff that, they're inventing new illnesses. It's crazy, these little ones.
I don't remember being that age, of course, but it's like, was I just sick for 2 straight years? Because every time we hang out with this kid, she's like just dripping snot everywhere. I don't understand it.
Well, I'm sure she appreciates your tutelage.
She did. She made us turn off college basketball and we had to watch Paw Patrol, but that is neither here nor there. I want to talk about the Magic because, one, they're your team. You cover them closely. You have as much insight on the Orlando Magic as anybody. And, for the first time in a while, they're also a super relevant story in the NBA. They're 9-5. They take care of the Toronto Raptors last night, a game that they ran away with early and never really looked back, 126-107. And we could grab this question in the chat from Eric right away because it does pertain to the Orlando Magic. He asked, does Franz Wagner's field goal percentage push up to 45% or better, or would you bet it stays at under 45% with a bigger shot diet this year? Good question from Eric.
Yeah, I'm noticing that he's not really good. He's not attacking the rim as frequently as we saw from him last year. I don't know if there's still some tired legs. This guy played a lot of basketball in FIBA, got all the way to the championship, won it. He's got a great Euro step and is really crafty around the rim. I just think he's been settling for jumpers more often this season than he did last year. My guess is that would change at some point. So I would say that it probably improves, does get better. But that's sort of what I'm noticing is that Franz Wagner is kind of pulling up and shooting a little bit more frequently and is attacking the basket less. Speaks to his tired legs, I think.
Yeah, if you just look at the very basic shooting breakdown on Basketball Reference, it doesn't go quite as advanced as like, NBA.com/stats or some of the advanced analytics sites that you'll check. But I think it usually gives you a pretty good snapshot. For one, he's shooting 28% from three. So
that hurts.
naturally that's just going to drag down anybody's field goal percentage. And Franz Wagner is not taking 12 threes a game. He's not Steph Curry, but even 5 attempts per game at 28%, like that's going to push down your overall field goal percentage 2 or 3 percentage points. And then on top of that, and perhaps a little bit more concerningly, Brandon, his shooting from 2-point range and specifically around the rim is down significantly. Last year from 0 to 3 feet, according to Basketball Reference, Franz Wagner shot 72.8%, which
was one of the best
good.
in the league, by the way.
That's extremely good for a non-big man. Yeah, that's high level stuff. I mean, he was at 63% as a rookie, which is pretty good, but down to 56.5%. So to me, it's a combination of the 3-point percentage, which I think will rise. He's not going to be a 30% 3-point shooter. He was 35, 36% his first 2 years. Not worried about that. But the at rim percentage down 16 percentage points.
Yeah, and he's also in his third year in the NBA. He got off the ground running pretty quick. I mean, he's been much quicker to come around in terms of his NBA efficiency on offense than a guy like Jalen Suggs, who was drafted a couple of spots ahead of him. I'm sure we'll talk about him. He's been fantastic. But I think part of there's some scouting that's going on here too. I think teams are getting better at defending Franz Wagner, so he's got to learn how to counterpunch that, and still is sort of working through that. I've noticed that as well. The field goal percentage is down, but that will improve. He's a smart basketball player.
Yeah, you mentioned Jalen Suggs, Brandon. Let's talk about him. We get a ton of Suggs questions, when we do these streams, and I know it's the same for Alex and Ken and Steve and Rick. Suggs continues to kind of chug along. I mean, the minutes have actually been a little bit down the last 2 games, 18 and 21 minutes respectively. Both of those games, being blowout scenarios. It hasn't really mattered. Still scored 18 points exactly in both of those. You now look back on his last 6 games, 16 points, 2 rebounds, 2.5 assists, 2.5 steals. That's the big one for fantasy. But I'm more interested in his 3-point shooting, which has been fantastic of late, 45% over those last 6 games, which has helped offset a slow start there. He's at about 35% on the year. Do you think that's ultimately where he settles? That would kind of be in line with the incremental improvement that we've seen from him in that area over his first 2 years.
Yeah, I think we're seeing incremental improvement basically across the board. I know that the 3-point shot is something that he worked on a lot in the offseason, and he's angling for a big-time payday. It's a little more obvious that Franz Wagner is going to get a serious extension. They were drafted in that same draft class. Jalen Suggs has to work for it because to this point, he hasn't proven that he's worth any sort of monster extension. And so I think what we're getting a little bit of is that contract year sort of momentum. But he also, he's just an uber competitor. The guy plays as hard as anybody else. These are the sort of advanced stats that I look at when breaking things down in pregame and whatnot. The hustle stats, things like diving after loose balls, he's basically better than anybody in the NBA when it comes to things like that. So you can see the extra sort of energy and effort that he's bringing to the table this year. When you add that to what he already is doing on the defensive end, and he's always brought it in terms of steals, and then you add the 3-point shot. I don't know how sustainable it is. That's the thing. He's been shooting lights out from deep. The stroke looks good. I can tell you it looks very repeatable, but I used to think that before, and the shots never fell. It looked like he was playing on a carnival rim. Yeah. So I'm a little bit skeptical in terms of the 3-point shooting. If that does stick around, we're talking about a legitimate breakout player in the NBA. In the same sort of way, another guy that I saw last night at the arena, we were talking about Scottie Barnes because of the way that he can fill up the stat sheet. I think if Jalen Suggs' 3-point shot does stick, we could talk about him in that same light. I'm just skeptical that it will.
Yeah. Well, I famously loved taking Jalen Suggs over Scottie Barnes. That was my I couldn't believe that the Raptors took Scottie Barnes on draft night. So that's looking like a big miss right now. But Suggs has had so many injuries. Like I've always liked how he's looked, and like you said, defensively, it's like I don't want his long term path to be like Patrick Beverley. Like that would feel like a disappointment based on how great of a prospect he was coming out of Gonzaga. But I think credit to him in a lot of ways for kind of finding his niche, right? And it's like, all right, if the shots aren't falling, if I'm not going to be a consistent offensive player, I need to find a way to force myself into this rotation. And I think he's done that on defense. You mentioned some of those hustle stats, which you can find at nba.com/stats. Jalen Suggs is 7th in the NBA this season in deflections per game at 3.2, which is extremely elite. He is number 3 in the NBA in loose balls recovered per game. Also, loose balls recovered per 36. 1.5. Asar Thompson is really the only player who ranks notably ahead of him. So that tracks really well. You mentioned Scottie Barnes. Kind of a weird night for the Raptors last night. Like we said, they fell behind early. Barnes was really bad early on. Ended up salvaging a pretty decent fantasy line, 14, 8, 4, and 3. What did you see from Toronto last night, which is a team that it feels like on some nights you're like, wow, they might be the 4th or 5th best team in the East. And then some nights they look like a team that's going to struggle to make the play-in like last year.
I saw nothing, really. I don't think that was indicative of who the Toronto Raptors are. They came into the game ranked top 10 in defensive rating. They played Ole defense all night long. This did not – if I didn't know the top 10 ranking going in, I would have thought this was one of the worst defenses in the NBA. They just let the Magic get whatever they wanted. They turned the ball over constantly. Scottie Barnes was a mess early on in the game. Yep. And then Pascal Siakam – he was about to check back in at about the 8-minute mark in the fourth quarter. The Magic had blown the doors off at that point, and they put him back on the bench, so he didn't even play. I had an over at 21.5 points for Pascal Siakam. I figured he would kind of get his in the paint, but he didn't even play in the fourth quarter, and he scored 16 points. So I had a bunch of tweets last night from other people that played points and rebounds and rebounds and assists, and everybody was sort of thrown off with that. I think Dennis Schroeder brings a nice presence. He got hot at a certain stretch in that game. Jakob Poeltl is a nice player, and he can mop up some points and rebounds and things like that. Those two guys kept them afloat at times, but the stars just didn't show up. I thought Pascal Siakam looked sort of irrelevant out there, and Scottie Barnes just didn't play a good game. I know he's been better than Suggs, but that was a big game. Jalen Suggs hears all of that. That Scottie Barnes was, first of all, drafted over him and has been far better in the NBA to this point than Jalen. And I think that was one of those games where you had a competitive athlete that took that game personally.
The Siakam thing is funny because I flipped over to that game. I was going back and forth between that one and the track meet between the Pacers and the Hawks, which we'll talk about in a moment. It was fun in some ways. It was, I kind of wish like Hubie Brown would have been on the call, just to hear his opinion on the defense that was being played. I mean, it was as bad as we expected, man.
Not exactly what Naismith had had in mind when he invented the game.
No, and we'll talk about that one in a sec. But Siakam is somebody that I have on like my 2 most important fantasy teams, and I like the value there. Like I actually took him over LeBron in a league, and I do still think there's a decent chance that over the course of 82 games that will pay off because obviously LeBron's a better player and he's like a top 8 fantasy player right now, but you just worry about the games played. That's been something that's dragged him down very obviously over the last 3 or 4 years. But I thought Siakam would be super safe, like 4th, 5th round, just like that's exactly what I want. And I've had the same issue with him and Jaren Jackson, who I have on a couple of teams, where they've been blown out so many times already that you get a lot of like 24-minute nights out of Siakam and Jaren Jackson. That's not what you expect. So like, was that a mistake on my part to maybe overvalue both of these teams, or in general kind of targeting good players on bad teams where you think, okay, Lauri Markkanen, for example, I have him on a bunch of teams. Last night was a complete blowout. They lose by 32, I think, to the Lakers. He barely plays in the second half. Is that somewhat of an oversight, in fantasy basketball where on paper you think, all right, this guy's clearly the best player on a bad team. Doesn't matter what the wins and losses are, the stats will still be there. But when you're getting blown out in like, a third of your games, all of a sudden that removes some of that ceiling.
Yeah, I think that's a really good thing to start to process as we work our way to the quarter point of the season, as we reevaluate just our process when you look at how to draft these players. I think the Pascal Siakam one is a little bit more surprising in terms of the way that he's gone in and out of fantasy relevance, because the Raptors shouldn't be as bad as they are. With Lauri Markkanen, maybe we should have seen that one coming. The Jazz, not a fully constructed real roster yet in the NBA. Jaren Jackson Jr., I mean, that's something that NBA heads like us just completely missed. I think a lot of us thought that the Grizzlies were going to be okay, at least decent, without Ja Morant, because when he missed time last year and in years past, they've been able to stay afloat, but there's no momentum on this team. So I think that you should forgive yourself for Siakam and Jaren Jackson Jr., but you're also talking to somebody who drafted Jordan Poole in a couple of leagues. So yeah, I've also made that mistake. I think it's important to factor that in. When teams are not good, they get blown out. We see more blowouts in the NBA now than ever before, and it makes it really tough to trust these guys, because you'll see players that straight up do not play at the end of games, and even if they're tracking towards solid production, they end up with a dud, and that seems to happen quite a lot. And it's usually when there's a star on a bad team, they can also be part of the reason why the team is bad, and I think that is something we should factor in as well.
Last thing I'll say on Toronto, and I think a big part of their struggles so far has been the bench play. Siakam on balance has still had a pretty decent year. Obviously Anunoby's missed time, but he's been fine. Scottie Barnes has been great. Pirtle, Schroeder, those guys have been about as expected. Schroeder probably a little above expected. But you can make the case that Toronto has the worst bench in the league so far this season. They're bottom 10 in just pure bench scoring per game. They are dead last in bench efficiency. Their bench is shooting 39.7% cumulatively from the field. And we saw that, kind of rear its ugly head last night. And it's just, it makes sense, right? It's like when your primary bench contributors are, Gary Trent, who either goes like 8 for 9 or 1 for 10 every game. Grady Dick, who I like long-term, but, ultimately a rookie, and the type of rookie that usually needs a bit of a runway to get going. Precious Achiuwa, Chris Boucher, who's somehow still on this roster. Like it's a very, very top-heavy roster. And unlike, a team like Philly or Milwaukee or Boston that has these like big-time stars at the top, it's like their stars are good. They're not great.
Yeah, and that's where I do think that's where we've seen the Magic playing a little over their heads, is that they actually have a good bench, and Jonathan Isaac is healthy right now. Not a lot of teams have a defensive presence like that coming off of their bench. So even though they don't have Markelle Fultz or Wendell Carter Jr. in the lineup, and they're still found their way to 9 wins in the season, you're seeing how important bench production is. When you get to the playoffs, I think it matters a whole lot less, because the starters are going to play heavier minutes. But early on in the season, that stuff absolutely matters. And you're right about Toronto. I mean, when they had a hard time breaking that lineup, and they sort of had a rotation where Barnes or Siakam were always on the floor. They weren't going to run too many sets with just strictly their bench guys, Malachi Flynn and characters like that. Grady Dick is looking like a bad pick right now, but you're right. We should exercise a little bit of patience.
I'm not going to criticize the Dick pick at this juncture.
Well done.
I think at that point in the draft, it's like, Jordan Hawkins went right after him. Similar player in some ways. I think that'll kind of be an interesting one to track. Keontae George went a few picks later. That would have been an interesting spot, but
they both look a lot better right now.
Yeah. I think the draft, it's already shaping up to be kind of a weird draft, right? Because I think the top 5 would still probably be the top 5. Obviously Scoot has not looked great, but he's only played a handful of games. I don't think we're punting on him. Amen Thompson got hurt immediately. Asar probably goes 2 or 3 if you're redoing it, but to me, there was a pretty significant line after that top 5, where, Anthony Black, Bilal Coulibaly, Jarris Walker, Taylor Hendricks, I don't even think has even played in a game yet. Like, he's just been nowhere near the Jazz rotation. So I'm not drawing any sweeping conclusions quite yet. I do think Grady Dick could be a nice bit player long-term. Let's talk about that Indiana-Atlanta game last night. We didn't get a question about it, but, John Doe just said, Hallie, baby. And he's correct, because this was an insane game from Halliburton. Yeah. I thought we might get like a 30-20 game at one point. Halliburton, I think he had 6 assists in the first quarter. Kind of turned into more of a scoring game for him in the second half. 9 of 15 from 3, 37, 16, 3 steals, 5 rebounds. I was telling Jeff on the radio last night like that. I regret not going a couple dollars higher for Halliburton in the RotoWire auction league. I regret, not reaching a little bit for him higher in the first round. obviously you basically had to have like a top 5 to 9 pick at worst to get Halliburton, but man, I mean he has more than lived up to the billing.
Oh, he's been amazing and came off of that bad game against the Magic from Sunday. You just kind of knew that he was due for a big time bounce back, delivered in a huge way. Even with the Hawks had 84 points, I think it was at the half, which was laughable. I'm sitting there at the I'm sitting there at the Amway Center. The third quarter is about to come to an end. The Raptors were struggling to get to 80. I look at NBA.com to check out the scores, and the Hawks were at the halftime break with 84. Or what was it?
86.
86. That's what they had. They had 86, which I think might be a franchise high in the first half. And they went up by 20 at one point against Indiana, and the Pacers came soaring back. You saw the over-under in this game was at 251.5. The live over-under at halftime was 300, and they still hit the over. Yeah.
Comfortably. Yeah. Well, Alex and I were doing the NBA show on NBA radio, and the total kept climbing like while we were on the show, and it closed at 253 at DraftKings. And, we talked about it kind of jokingly, and it's like, Alex looked it up, and, there's only been, I think he said since 2017, there had only been 2 games that closed with a total of 250 or higher. And it was, one to the over, one to the under. And we're just like, I don't know if you can really bet this. It's too high. I mean, the over 253 cashed with like 8 minutes left in the fourth quarter, and they just kept going. I mean, it was great offense in a lot of ways. Halliburton especially was like the degree of difficulty on some of those looks was pretty ridiculous. But the shot quality overall, I mean, the defense was horrendous, especially around the rim. But like Buddy Hield, 6 of 6 from 3, like all 6 of those were basically wide open. Trae Young, DeJounte Murray were getting whatever they wanted. It was a nice night for Jalen Johnson. I mean, we wanted to do some like buy or sell in this episode, and I assume we'll eventually just hit the Q&A and be on our way here. But one of the things I wanted to ask you about is like, are you buying that this is a sustainable model for the Pacers to just try to win every game like 140 to 137?
I think they're already too far down the highway to turn around on this road trip. I think this is just who they are. They're going to do this throughout the course of the season. I mean, at some point, either the odds makers will catch up or just the law of averages, and they're not going to hit an over every time they play. It's been 12-1 to the over in their games so far this season. No way that keeps up, but they're going to continue to score a bunch of points. They play no defense. Rick Carlisle does not I can't imagine that he's having many conversations with this team on their off days about how they need to get better defensively, because they just continue to get worse. And it just doesn't seem like this is a point of emphasis for this Pacers team. This is the way they're going to try and beat you. They're going to try and get as close as they can to 200 every single night. And some nights like last night, they'll be able to get close, 157. I mean, that's incredible. Not a lot of teams in the NBA can do that. Not a lot of teams in the NBA want to play like that. It's not going to work as they get closer to the postseason, but this is who they are. I don't see this changing at any point this season. They're going to score a lot of points. And if you have Tyrese Halliburton, some of these other key characters, you should feel pretty good about where you are right now. We're going to talk buy or sell. I think these guys are holds. I don't want to move any of these Pacers players. I love what I'm getting.
I attempted desperately to trade for Buddy Hield in a league this past week. He'd been coming off of some down games. His minutes had been slashed, and obviously there's the trade talk kind of hanging over Buddy Hield. I thought maybe I'd be able to pry him away. No, very smartly, the great Aaron Quinn, who always does well in our RotoWire leagues, put the kibosh on that one. But Buddy Hield is he's always one of my favorite players to roster. I never get enough of him. Like, we say it all the time. Like he plays more games than anybody. He is as consistent as it gets. Like you're going to have to live with some down weeks, but on balance, I mean, short of like, the ultra elite guys, Lillard, Harden at his peak, Stephen Curry, like Buddy Hield has been, number 2 and made 3-pointers like 5 times already throughout his career. He's played more games than anybody since he's come into the league. Like he is always one of the more underrated fantasy guys. And even with the trade stuff hanging over him, it just hasn't really mattered so far. And if he is dealt somewhere, I don't think his outlook really changes. I mean, I guess Indiana is like the best case scenario for fantasy right now. So from like a pace and possessions perspective, maybe it could be a downgrade, but I also think he could, if he's traded to a team that really values him and views him as somebody who could be like a 32, 33 minute a night guy, I think that would cancel out. And I think he could have even more upside somewhere else.
Yeah, I completely agree. And that was something that we talked about before the season started. if Buddy Hield is traded for, it's going to be because of what Buddy Hield does well. Teams aren't going to trade for him just so that they can have him just coming off the bench as a luxury piece. A team that makes a move on Buddy Hield, because it's not going to be cheap, is going to be a team that needs 3-point shooting, and they're going to let him fire away, whoever that might be, if it does happen. Because the Pacers right now are playing really well. I've got a futures bet on them to win the in-season tournament, by the way, and I'm feeling pretty good about that. 16-1.
They clinched their group last night. Both the Pacers and the Lakers clinched their group, so they will be among the teams that are on to, I guess they're calling it the semifinals. Lakers, by virtue of, I think they're 4-0 now in their group, they'll have home court in their efforts to make the Final Four. Well, we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. We'll start hitting some questions in the chat as well, but got some messages to pass along. First, from our friends at Underdog. Underdog Fantasy is the #1 platform for NBA best ball and DFS player pick'em contests. If you have not tried Underdog yet, new users receive a first-time deposit bonus up to $100 and a free 6-month subscription to RotoWire. All you got to do is use the promo code RWNBA. That's RWNBA. Visit UnderdogFantasy.com or download the Underdog app today and use that promo code RWNBA to get your free RotoWire subscription and that deposit bonus up to $100. Vivid Seats. The NBA season's underway. On behalf of our friends at Vivid Seats, let's get one thing clear. Nothing beats seeing your favorite team crush it on the court to the sound of thousands of screaming fans. Every dunk, dribble, heart-pounding play from your favorite team live and in person. And because Vivid Seats is the only ticketing company where you can earn rewards on every purchase, you can score amazing deals and unrivaled annual rewards all season long. Plus, with a 100% buyer guarantee, you can be sure your ticket will be as legit as your love for the game. Go to vividseats.com or download the Vivid Seats app today. That's what I use to get those tickets to go to Wizards Bucks on Friday. And use our promo code RotoWire for $20 off your first $200 purchase. That promo code is RotoWire, ROTOWIRE, for $20 off your first $200 ticket purchase. Download the app or visit vividseats.com. Vivid Seats, experience it live. All right, you know what? Let's just hit the third read right away. Let's knock them all out here. Rival Fantasy. LeBron versus Jordan. Magic versus Bird. Barkley versus McHale. Suggs versus Barnes. Basketball is synonymous with legendary rivalries. They make the game more fun and give fans the storylines that raise the stakes every time the players meet on the court or come up in conversation. Now, every player matchup and head-to-head debate can be settled on Rival Fantasy. This season, you can play challenges where you decide which player will score more points in their next game. You can play the Rival Fantasy in-house challenges or create your own and get your friends in the mix with a customizable social challenge. Sign up at joinrival.com/RotoWire right now. Do it right now. Get a $200 deposit match. You can do this right now while the NBA season is still in its infancy. Go to joinrival.com/RotoWire. It's time to step up to the challenge on Rival Fantasy. We will see you in the arena. All right, Brandon, let's hit a couple of the questions in the chat here. We always get Jordan Poole questions. Do we think Jordan Poole will relatively keep up his scoring from the last game? Poole, of course, had his best scoring game of the year earlier this week in a loss to the Milwaukee Bucks. His first 30-point game of the entire year, Brandon, and only the third time that he scored over 20.
Yeah, my first instinct is to say no. I think the sample of what we've seen through the other 10 games or so that have been played this year have told me what Jordan Poole is. He's supposed to be the star of this team. His usage should be through the roof. His points per game should be among the top 10 in the NBA. We are not seeing that this year. One game isn't gonna sell me back onto Jordan Poole. I think if you can sell him, make it happen.
Sell him. Yeah, I agree. I don't know if one game is going to sway anybody's opinion, but I think if I'm a Jordan Poole owner right now, I'm hoping that he goes for like 40 tonight against Charlotte and then puts up 38 against Milwaukee on Friday. I get that if he starts trending in that direction, obviously it becomes more appealing to keep him, but I just don't think this is going to be sustainable. I don't think it's going to go the way that we thought it would this season with Jordan Poole. I mean, overwhelmingly so far, it's been a huge disappointment. And even on Monday when he had the 30-point game, 1 rebound, 1 assist, no steals, no blocks. He's basically, even when he's playing well, he's basically just a points and threes only guy. The free throw percentage has always been a plus for him, but he's only taking 2.8 free throws per game. so far this season. He was up over 5 per game last year with Golden State. So, even if he starts scoring the ball better, like for fantasy purposes, especially in category leagues, he's just not really helping you all that much. I mean, his usage rate, Brandon, is down compared to last season. Like, how is that possible?
I don't know. I don't get it. I really thought that, I mean, maybe this is what we had overestimated or underestimated, was that new system in Washington, new players, that they were just going to let these guys go out there and do whatever they wanted. And they clearly have, like most NBA teams should, a game plan, a certain approach to every game. And it doesn't necessarily involve letting Jordan Poole do whatever he wants. And when he went to Washington, you just know that was what was going through his head is, now I get a franchise to myself and I can play Jordan Poole ball and everybody can stand around and watch. And his head coach is not allowing that to happen.
Interesting question here. Santi Aldama, is he the truth? Is Santi Aldama him, Brandon? Or should I continue streaming Goga Bitadze?
I mean, he can't be him if the question is then followed up with, should I continue streaming Goga Bitadze? I think we overuse him. We need to be more selective with who we call him. There's only one or two. But yeah, I totally swung and missed on my guy Goga Bitadze last week. I was saying, this isn't going to keep up. He's been fantastic. I mean, honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if they've created some sort of big man controversy with the Magic and the way that he's blocking shots, and his passing is outstanding. He had 5 assists in the first quarter last night. They were crisp dimes too. So I love what I'm seeing from him. I think Santi Aldama is good. I don't know if I can go as far as to say that he's the truth, but I'm all in on Goga right now.
I mean, it's a weirdly difficult decision because both guys have played really well lately. I think Aldama maybe a little bit more sustainable. Xavier Tillman, we got an update on him on Monday saying that he's now week to week. And, I think that was kind of the biggest reason that Aldama's minutes were up and his usage was up the last few games is, they were without Tillman and Steven Adams, who obviously is not coming back anytime soon. So, if you're just looking in the short term, I think maybe try to milk the blocks and steals and assists out of Bitadze as long as you can. But if you're looking for somebody who you can keep on your roster for multiple weeks, I would rather have Aldama. I think the question is, like, we say it somewhat in jest, but Wendell Carter's coming back soon, right? And at that point, what does Bitadze's minute share look like?
He's still going to be involved because he's just played too well not to be. The question is, I think the question becomes more about how this impacts the rotation with Mo Wagner, because it's not like you're going to bring both of them off the bench together. Right now that's working, that split where Goga starts and Mo comes off the bench. Wendell Carter back in the lineup. Somebody has to lose their minutes. And right now, Goga Bitadze has just simply been better. So I do think that they're last week I overreacted in the wrong direction. Hopefully this one's the right direction. I think he's here to stay, at least in some regard. But I agree with you. I think Santi Aldama has more of the sustainability factor. But if you're looking for somebody that can get you some tough stats that are otherwise hard to come by, I think Goga might be the guy.
Is Bojan Bogdanovic worth an IR slot? Asks Justin. Man, this is so tough because, like, the Pistons, if they want to try to win more games, the answer is yes, they should play him. If the season already feels like it's getting away from Detroit, we still don't really know exactly when Bogdanovic is going to be back. He was cleared for basketball activities on Tuesday, and they have a, quote, return to play progression now set up for Bogdanovic. I have no idea what that means. I mean, he could be back maybe as soon as next week. Could be in December. Who knows? I would say if you don't have anybody valuable in your IR slot right now, then yes, like you might as well grab him and just throw him in there. There's not a whole lot of harm there. If you're holding somebody who's more productive, then obviously I would probably pass. But I think we at least see an audition period for Bogdanovic. I don't think he finishes the season in Detroit, but I think he needs to play a few weeks and build his value, and hopefully they can get like a protected first for him.
Yeah, they'll want to get him back out there, and they're starting to lose bodies. They're dealing with a bunch of injuries. Monte Morris just came out that he's out for 6 to 8 weeks. I mean, it's an IR spot. Who isn't worth holding in an IR spot if you've got it available? So I think in that respect, Bojan Bogdanovic is you could do worse with a spot that otherwise might not be utilized right now.
Well, in Detroit, I mean, the Pistons, like percentage-wise, they're kind of middle of the pack in terms of three-point shooting. They're dead last in three-point attempts per game, but that's not where you want to be in the modern NBA. That's not. Very few teams can take under 33s a game and have success. And I think the lack of shooting is a big part of the reason that they're off to this start. So if you think he is long for Detroit and maybe they actually want him on this roster, then I think it makes sense to plug him back in and try to boost that. But overall, I would say yes, worth stashing him. Especially if you're in a 12 or a 14 team league, then absolutely. Question pertaining to the Indiana Pacers, Brandon: Isaiah Jackson or Jalen Smith, as to who's a better hold or somebody to keep an eye on for that backup center job.
I've always been a bigger fan of Isaiah Jackson. I just think he plays a little bit more tenacity, and we've seen him. He's had at least a blocked shot in over the last couple of weeks, a couple of steals a few nights back as well. So I mean, he's getting you some of those gritty defensive stats, great around the rim. I think I would lean Isaiah Jackson.
Yep. Yeah, he's been the guy that's been getting slightly more minutes lately. A couple of weeks ago, I would have said Jalen Smith, but I think Isaiah Jackson, he's one of those guys that even if he plays like 11 minutes, he could still get you 2 or 3 blocks. And ultimately, that's what you're chasing. I think neither of these guys are going to be like 20-minute a night type of players. So I would lean Isaiah Jackson as well. Who will have more rest of season value in a 9-cat roto league? Tyus Jones or Ben Simmons? Take your pick.
Yeah. Do we know if Ben Simmons is if he's going to play again?
We don't know. We have no idea. We're going down that path again.
I mean, Tyus Jones has been really bad. Tyus Jones has been bad, but so it's basically, do you want bad or unavailable? That's those are your options. I'll take bad. I'll go Tyus Jones.
Yeah, the type of fantasy player I am, I'll always side with the less risky player. So I would say Tyus Jones. Last 4 games for Jones, it's been a little bit better, but really not all that much. I mean, we thought the steals would be there more consistently, and they were early on. That's fallen off. I thought he could be a 7-8 assists a game guy, and that's also not been the case. He's only had a couple of games that have met that criteria, so it's a pretty underwhelming decision either way. I think Ben Simmons is going to probably cause you more frustration than he's worth on balance. So I would hold Tyus Jones, and he's somebody I think is easier to trade on somebody. If he has 1 or 2 good weeks, I think there's going to be a little more value there. Talking about Buddy Hield and the Indiana Pacers, Tristan asks, would Buddy Hield be a good fit on the Wolves? They could use his shooting, but they are trying to create a defensive environment. How would Buddy Hield fit with that? I don't mind that. I think that's a good fit. I think if Buddy Hield becomes like truly available, I mean, there's going to be a bidding war for him. I think basically any semi-contending team is going to be interested.
Yeah, and their bench is not very good. So I think they could use that extra spark. Even if they have that defensive mentality, you still need 3-point shooting. We've seen how many teams in NBA history that have brought it on the defensive end and still have that guy that they can bring off the bench and can snipe and kind of keep you in games that way. So I don't think he disrupts things too much. I think that's a great fit. We're seeing a team right now that's playing really well. 10 wins already. Big game tonight against the Philadelphia 76ers. And I think Buddy Hield would be a tremendous addition to that team. They should go for it. Oh, I don't know if they have draft capital left after what they did to get Gobert, but if you can make it work.
Yeah, that's the big impetus for Minnesota. But on paper, I like that fit quite a bit. Zach asks, who do you think are long-term pickups from the waiver wire? He says Bilal Coulibaly has already been picked up. Derek Lively has already been picked up as well. Sounds like you're in a relatively competitive league. It's kind of difficult to say who's out there on any specific waiver wire right now. And, even more difficult to find somebody who could say, yeah, he's just going to be on your roster the rest of the way. Does anybody come to mind for you right away? I'll pull up some of my leagues and kind of see who's out there. But did any names jump out to you?
Yeah, I've been staring at Duncan Robinson. I mean, like you said, it depends on the size of your league and all of that, but I love the way that he's been playing, filling in Jaime Jaquez if he's available. Those Heat guys that have been filling in for Tyler Hero, if that injury becomes something that persists and goes on even longer, that Heat team is playing really well right now. and they need the offensive presence from both of those guys.
Kevin Huerter is somebody for me where, you're going to have to live with the down games, but on balance, he's been a top 100 guy on the year. I know he's available in like 30% of Yahoo leagues right now. Jalen Suggs is still available in over 40% of Yahoo leagues. I think Kelly Oubre is an interesting pickup when he comes back. Maybe we'll have to do like an investigative episode on what exactly happened there, because there's been some pushback as to whether or not he actually got hit by a car. But either way, it sounds like he's going to be back, kind of on the shorter end of the initial timeline, and he's somebody who's available right now in 42% of Yahoo leagues. I mean, Goga's still out there. I wouldn't necessarily call him a long-term ad. Grayson Allen is pretty widely available. Bradley Beal's going to miss, probably another month or so. If you're looking for kind of like category specialist types, like Malik Beasley, again, you're going to have to live with some down weeks, some down games, but high volume 3-pointers, he's out there in like 75% of leagues. Saddiq Bey is under 50% rostered right now. That's somebody who I think they were more comfortable letting John Collins go, mostly because I think they really trusted Jalen Johnson, and that looks like a great decision. But I think part of it too is they wanted more consistent time for Saddiq Bey.
Yeah, and I'm seeing some of the other names just kind of combing through this. What do you think about somebody like a Coby White, the way that he's played for the Chicago Bulls, especially if they start to blow this thing up? I don't think he'd be part of the trade process. He could be somebody that sees extended minutes going down the road.
Yep.
You're really, if you're talking about long-term pickups off the waiver wire, you're just shooting darts at this point. So just try and project ahead at some of the moves that you could see happening, or some of the guys that are just constantly injured and the players that would fill in their stead.
Yeah, I love the Coby White call. That's one where you might have to kind of wait and pick your spots, start him in 4-game weeks. But I think it's a lock that Zach LaVine is traded at some point. If it gets to the point where you're basically publicly saying like, yeah, I want out of here, like there's almost no history of players just remaining on the roster. So I think he's gone. I think that could start a waterfall where, Nick Vucevic could be on the block if they could find a taker. That's going to be a tougher one to trade. I think DeRozan could be dealt as well. And, if you're Chicago, obviously you're looking for high upside young players first and foremost, but I don't know if they're going to get that. I think you're going to end up probably taking a picks heavy package. And there's a good chance that over the second half of the season, Coby White could be playing 35 minutes a game and be like the second option for the Bulls.
Yeah, because a lot of these guys that are going to end up getting dealt, they're going to go to teams that they want to hang on to the pieces they have. We're talking about teams that want to be competitive. You're not going to have those the teams that are, like I'll use the Magic as an example, that they what they're building, they want to see what they have in those guys. They're not going to give up their young pieces to bring in somebody so that they can be the 6th seed instead of the 8th seed. You're not going to see teams do that. You're certainly not going to see teams at the bottom pull that off, unless it's like a San Antonio Spurs squad that just wants to give Victor Wembanyama something to play with. But for the most part, it's going to be teams that are already competitive that don't want to give up on the value that they currently have on the roster.
Mm-hmm. DeAndre Ayton or Brandon Ingram in a 9-category, 12-team dynasty league? Interesting question. Ayton has been a better fantasy player so far this season. I would still much rather have Brandon Ingram, who is like deceptively young. He's been in the league for a while, but he came in super young. He was super young in his freshman year at Duke. I think for me, it's pretty clearly Ingram, even though there's a case to be made that he might be like more effective in real life than fantasy. There's kind of always been a slight disconnect there. But with Ayton, you're still dealing with motivational questions. Like we have no idea like the true direction of the Trailblazers. And, right now he's kind of feasting on, just a bunch of boards and points on a bad team. I would rather have Ingram.
I agree with you. Ingram is the better player. He's going to give you much more upside in terms of his scoring potential. A good enough defender where you can mop up some stats in that way, and he's an efficient shooter as well. DeAndre Ayton, all I need to know is that he played his former team last night. I was thinking he was going to go off. I'm talking like 25 points, 10 rebounds kind of night. Yeah, 18 points. They got blown out by the Suns. That's what you're doing against the team that discarded you. And we're talking about a guy who struggles with motivation. You're not going to find a more motivated spot than last night. I'm color me unimpressed with what I saw from Ayton in that position.
Minus 33 in 31 minutes last night. And you're like, okay, Portland got blown out. Everybody was probably bad. No. Like Jeremy Grant played 36 minutes, was only -7. Not that correlates 1-to-1 to fantasy, but no, you want Brandon Ingram in that situation. Interesting one here from Mal. Should I trade Kevin Durant? Right away, you're probably like, no. Why would you trade a top 5 fantasy player? And I wouldn't do it right now. But I think it's an interesting discussion to have because Alex and I, had the same talk about LeBron on Monday. And, when you're talking about older players who've had serious injuries, both have missed a ton of time over the last 4 or 5 years. Is there an argument to cut bait on a player like that at some point? Do you ride it for 25, 30 games and then, try to switch off to somebody who you think has a better chance to play 75 games? The question that Alex asked me is like, would you trade LeBron for Tyrese Maxey?
Ooh, I think I'd still rather have LeBron. I don't worry as much about LeBron. I know that he's missed more time recently than he ever did before, but he never missed any time. This is still a guy that he's going to rest. I think his off days are going to be more decision based than, to use an old LeBron reference, than injury related. And so it's still a missed game for you in fantasy. But when you decide you're going to take a night off, usually you're right back at it the very next night. So it's not that problematic. Yeah. Kevin Durant, if he misses time, it's going to be because of injury. And that means he doesn't get a say in whether or not he comes back quicker. I do worry about this sustainability, especially with Bradley Beal now on the shelf. And it feels like things are just falling apart early on in Phoenix. He's been scoring a ton of points. That's what he does. I don't think it's a bad idea. But it's so situational, Nick. I mean, it really depends. You're going to trade a guy like Kevin Durant. You can't just say that yes in a vacuum. I got to see what I'm getting back.
Number 2 in the NBA in minutes played so far, which I don't know if that was necessarily the plan for Kevin Durant. I mean, if you're trading him, you obviously need to get a king's ransom back, right? You got to get either another super elite player that you trust more to play more games over the course of the season, or you need a package of lesser players that equate to a better return. They had Kevin Durant. So, if you could flip him for, I don't know, like Luka or, Halliburton or somebody like that, I would consider it because I think there's a good chance, history suggests that Kevin Durant is going to miss 15, 20 games at some point, and you're going to be hurting during that time. But, don't lowball by any means, aim high if you're trying to deal Kevin Durant.
Yeah. I like the Halliburton call. I would make that offer right now.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would rather have the Halliburton side. I really would. I know he missed time last year too, but I would rather have him right now. Marco asked, 12-team cat league, should I drop Ben Mathurin and pick up Jabari Smith Jr.?
I don't know. Maybe I'm too high on Pacers players, but I'm trying to hold on Ben Mathurin. I know he doesn't fill up the stat sheet like we want to see in terms of the category scoring, but then his field goal percentage can be all over the place. I still want pieces of this Pacers team. I just think they're going to put up such gaudy numbers that should be able to help you in fantasy by the end of the day. And Jabari Smith is the one guy on this roster just not that impressed. The Rockets are playing really well right now, but Jabari Smith just not really blowing me away. It's too many other mouths to feed offensively. And he just feels like he's kind of lost in the shuffle. I think he's a decent player. This is a terrible fit for him. I honestly feel bad that he wound up in Houston.
All that is correct, but I still think Jabari Smith might be the better fantasy player. Like Mathurin is more effective and a more key piece for the Pacers, but a lot of the things that kind of pushed up his fantasy value, especially early last season, have regressed a bit. He's taking half as many free throws per game so far this year compared to last year. And part of it is his minutes are down as well. Field goal percentage is about where it was last year. Free throw percentage, 3-point percentage, about the same. But he's kind of a points only guy. He really is. And if he's not getting to the line 6 times a game like he was last year, that eliminates the second best category, which was free throws. And he's hovering around like 78 to 80% from the line. So it's not like he's 90% there either. Jabari Smith is really frustrating. I think his lows are going to be lower, but it also feels like it's been a worst case scenario start and it can only be better from here. So I think I would actually side with Jabari Smith on that one. We'll have to agree to disagree.
Yeah.
Free Key, who is always a presence in our streams. We appreciate that. He asked, WTF, what the frick is up with Jalen Duren and the Detroit Pistons? They've been vague about the whole situation. Yeah. They sure have. I mean, that is the Detroit Pistons for you. This is a kind of a disaster of an organization from the top down. I saw one of their local radio guys did like a 10-minute takedown of the entire franchise yesterday, and it was well received, which is not a great sign. We did get an update on Duren yesterday over at RotoWire that he is expected to practice at some point this week, so he's finally moving in the right direction. Pistons are off today. Obviously, they're off tomorrow, so conceivably that practice would probably come today or tomorrow. They play at Indy on Friday. My guess is he probably misses the Indy game, but could be back next week. They play Washington. That's a good matchup on Monday. It's been really weird. It's been vague. It feels like he's missed more time than he has. Like he's only missed the last 5 games. So I think you just kind of hold here, and you should get him back pretty soon.
Yeah, I don't know this for sure, but just following the news over the last couple of years, the Pistons might have one of the worst strength and conditioning team, or in terms of their coaching staff in the NBA. It seems like their guys just miss the inordinate amount of time. There's never updates, progressions, any of that. I mean, I know what that life is like. The Magic used to have that. They had to overhaul their strength and conditioning staff, and it's night and day. That stuff makes a huge difference. Just seeing the way the business is handled in Detroit, it just seems like they're just not buttoned up in that department. I can see, that is frustrating.
Zion Williamson or Scottie Barnes rest of season. For me, my initial indication is pretty strongly in favor of Barnes.
Yeah. I love Zion, the player, but in terms of fantasy, Scottie Barnes has just been so good, and I don't see that going away anytime soon.
Yeah, and I think you could argue about who's the better real life asset. I mean, there's no question based on what we've seen so far, not only this season but in years past, that Scottie Barnes is a way better fantasy asset. Way better fantasy asset. I mean, he ranks like 120 spots ahead of Zion on the year, and it's been kind of a weird season for Zion. He's made some comments that he doesn't love how he's being used, and I understand that, but especially if you're playing in a category league, he's at 58% from the line, and he's shooting 7 free throws a game. Like that is a killer. The field goal percentage is nice, but it's not where it was in the past. He was a 62% field goal percentage player over the last 2 years. He's at 54% now. This year, he's still not giving you any threes. He's not giving you any blocks. A smattering of assists and steals, which are okay, but Scottie Barnes, if we're just talking fantasy, like you absolutely want Barnes rest of season.
Yeah, no doubt. It just seems like Zion, like the team isn't built around Zion like we thought it would be when he was drafted. It feels like he's more part of the equation than the start of it.
Yeah, and I don't think, when CJ McCollum comes back, I don't think that necessarily helps Zion. It makes him a better team and, maybe gives him some better scoring opportunities, but it's not going to help his usage rate. Sean asks, Walker Kessler or Jalen Duren rest of season?
I'm going to lean Walker Kessler, and maybe it's because of the injury pessimism for Jalen Duren. Love what we saw out of the gate from him, but I just think Walker Kessler projects to be a better player. Love what he brings on the defensive end. The blocks are always going to be there with the way that he plays. So I think I would lean the way of Kessler, and he's not going to kill you in terms of field goal percentage.
I think we had the same question on Monday, and Alex and I were kind of split on this. I was pretty firmly Walker Kessler. I know he got off to a bad start. I think that's left a bad taste in some people's mouths, but I think when he comes back, he's at some point going to reach close to the heights of last season, and I just want the blocks. I mean, we're talking about a guy who we thought might lead the NBA in that category this year. And, I think the injury kind of threw that off course. But I'd rather have Walker Kessler. If you specifically need like rebounds and, maybe even more reliable points, there is an argument for Jalen Duren. I mean, before he got hurt, he was fantastic, better passer than Walker Kessler as well. But, he gives you maybe a block a game, whereas, there's a lot of weeks where Walker Kessler could be giving you like 3 or 4 blocks per game. So, yeah, I would lead Kessler, more of a scarcity type of stat to be chasing in fantasy anyway. Brandon, I think we can get out of here, man. I kind of wanted to keep this one a little bit shorter anyway. I know we both have really busy days. We got 14 games coming at us on the NBA slate. You got to get to the arena later to cover Nuggets and the Orlando Magic. So we'll get out of here, man. We will archive this, as we always do, in the RotoWire Fantasy Basketball podcast feed. If you want to listen back there, you can find that on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your pods. We thank everybody for listening along live here on YouTube and on Twitter, and for giving us great questions. We will have no episodes on Thursday and Friday this week. Thought about trying to fit them in, but with the holiday, it was just a little bit too difficult. So stick with us. We'll be back in full capacity with 5 episodes starting next Monday. Brandon, enjoy the holiday, man, and we'll talk soon.
Yeah, happy Thanksgiving to all of you. Thanks so much for spending your time with us.